You? Married to a man with kids? Hard to believe someone as defective as you pulled it off. Today was supposed to be a happy day, my child's elementary school entrance ceremony. I wanted nothing more than to enjoy this moment, but then I ran into my ex-husband, Connor. It had been 9 years since our divorce, but he spoke to me like no time had passed at all. So where is your husband? Do not tell me you just got married to play nanny for some other guy's kid. Man, that is rough. Used like that. He snickered, then smirked. Or maybe you are just thrilled to have any child at all, considering, you could not have one yourself. Even if it is not yours, you are probably just grateful, huh? The way he mocked me so casually made my blood boil. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my composure. I was not about to let him ruin this day. The ceremony was about to begin. I just had to endure this for now. But then, something strange happened. Connor, the same guy who had just been spewing insults at me, suddenly went stiff. His cocky grin vanished, replaced by a look of sheer panic. His body tensed, his shoulders jerked up, and he took a step back like a cornered animal. What was he so afraid of? My name is Rachel, and I am 33 years old. I got married and moved to a quiet town in the countryside. My husband, Connor, was born and raised here. It is also where I first met him. It happened about a year ago when I was on a road trip with some friends. We had rented a car and were following the GPS, but somehow we ended up on a narrow farm road. I was driving and trying to find a place to turn around when the wheel sank into a patch of thick mud. The car was stuck, completely trapped. As I stood there, unsure of what to do, Connor appeared. He looked like he had just walked out of a movie, confident and ready to handle the situation. Without hesitation, he called for backup, and soon enough, the car was pulled free. Thanks for the help, I said, relieved. Connor wiped his hands on his jeans and grinned. No problem. That will be $33,000. Special price for you. I blinked in shock before realizing he was joking. The guy had an easy charm, and the way he bantered with the man who helped him made him even more appealing. I smiled. Well, the least I can do is buy you dinner. That dinner led to more conversations, more time spent together, and eventually we got married. The town Connor brought me to was small, just outside a more developed regional city. It was not entirely rural, but it was quiet enough that you needed a car to get around. As a wedding gift, Connor's parents built us a house on a plot of land right next to theirs. It should have been perfect. At first, I struggled with driving since everything was so spread out, but I practiced until I got comfortable. That, however, was not the real problem. The real issue was that Connor was deeply embedded in the local scene. His friends were everywhere, and socializing with them was practically mandatory. Barbecues were a big deal. Almost every weekend, 4 or 5 of Connor's buddies would gather in our yard. Hey, Rachel, we are out of beer. Pour drinks for everyone, would you? Man, it is taking forever to grill this meat. If it takes this long just for a steak, I bet it takes you 3 days to cook a regular meal. Connor's friends loved to joke at my expense. The teasing, the orders, the expectations. I was supposed to play the perfect hostess. I was sweating under the blazing sun, flipping meat, my makeup ruined, but they did not care. Connor laughed along with them. He never defended me. I forced myself to smile and keep my head down. I had always been a social person, but this was different. This was exhausting. And then there was Heather. Oh, Rachel, you are so clueless, she would say in a sing-song voice, flipping her hair. I guess I will have to pour drinks for everyone. Heather had been the only woman in the group before I arrived, and she made sure I knew it. At first, she seemed friendly, even protective. Rachel is Connor's wife. No touching, no getting too close. For a brief moment, I thought she was on my side. But I quickly realized the truth. Heather saw me as competition. While I was running around, making food and serving drinks, she sat back and basked in the attention of the men. Rachel, give me a pizza. No green peppers. She would not lift a finger to help. If anything, she made my job harder. These barbecues were supposed to help me integrate into the community, but after 6 months of marriage, I still felt like an outsider. On top of that, the conversations were unbearable. I once took down 100 guys all by myself, barehanded. It was always some exaggerated tale of bravado. I knew they were full of it, but all they wanted to hear was, "That is amazing!" Even after the barbecues ended and the guests left, I still could not relax. Connor would linger, grinning. "Do not believe that guy's story from earlier," he would whisper. "He was actually getting his ass kicked until I showed up and handled it." But I do not say anything. I let him save face. Then he would lean back, sighing dramatically. "You know, just hearing my name makes people tremble in this town. Even in the next town over, people are scared of me." I would sit there, nodding absent-mindedly, while inside, I wondered what I had gotten myself into. "You know, just hearing my name makes people in this town nervous. Even folks in the next town over are afraid of me." Connor said that with pride, flashing a smug grin. He had just finished listening to yet another exaggerated story from one of his buddies, and now it was his turn to brag. It did not matter whether his stories were true or not. All that mattered was that I nodded along and acted impressed. That was the real challenge, listening to his nonsense while putting up with Heather's queen-like behavior at every gathering. One evening, after the barbecue was over, I was left to clean up by myself, just like always. As I was gathering up empty beer bottles and discarded napkins, my mother-in-law strolled over from next door. "It looked like such a fun time today," she said with a warm smile. "Ah, yes," I replied, though "fun" was not exactly the word I would use. Then, as if it was just a casual topic of conversation, she asked, "So when are you going to have kids? You cannot just be hanging out with friends forever. Barbecues are nice, but they are even better with family, do not you think?" I forced a smile. This was not the first time she had brought this up. "Well, these things happen when they happen," I answered vaguely. My mother-in-law waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, do not worry. You are only 25. You can have babies easily at your age. A girl would be nice first. Girls are easier to raise than boys. For the second, maybe a boy. And for the third, well, it does not really matter." She clapped her hands together, looking delighted. "Oh, I cannot wait. I bet your kids will be adorable." I had heard this speech so many times it was like listening to a broken record. Just like Connor's ridiculous stories, my mother-in-law never got tired of repeating it. 2 years passed. Connor's friends, who used to crowd into our backyard every weekend, were now getting married and having kids of their own. The barbecues were not as lively as before, but they still happened. The problem was, I still had not gotten pregnant. At first, people just joked about it. But soon, the teasing turned into something else. Connor and his friends became even more dismissive, ordering me around without a second thought. My mother-in-law's cheerful remarks turned sharp and bitter. "Connor is almost 30, and you are 27 now," she said one evening, crossing her arms. "At this age, you should already have 2 kids. What is taking so long?" If I could have gotten pregnant, I would have. It was not like I had not tried. I wanted to see a doctor, maybe get fertility tests or treatments. But Connor and his mother would not even consider it. "That would make us look bad," they said. "People would talk." My once cheerful mother-in-law now called me useless. And despite everything I was already doing, taking care of the house, working part-time at a factory during the week, hosting Connor's friends on weekends, and even helping out with my in-laws' business early in the mornings and late at night. It was never enough. To them, my worth was tied to one thing: having a child. Feeling the pressure, I tried everything: home remedies, special teas, expensive vitamins. Nothing worked. But looking back, how could it have? Connor and I barely had an intimate relationship to begin with. No matter how much his parents talked about trying for a baby, he had no interest in actually making one. Then one morning, out of nowhere, he said it. "Let's get a divorce." I blinked at him, my coffee mug halfway to my lips. "What?" Connor set his spoon down and leaned back in his chair. "You cannot have kids. What about my heir?" I was still struggling to process what he had just said when his mother spoke up. "Rachel," she said in an almost gentle tone, "do you know what a wife's most important job is? It is bringing children into the world." I looked at her, then at Connor. They were both smiling. "It is okay, Rachel," Connor said. "We already have an heir." I frowned. "What?" Connor's grin twisted into something cruel. "Wendy is pregnant." It took me a second to understand what he was saying. While I had been trying everything to start a family with him, Connor had been having an affair with Heather, and now she was pregnant. "Unlike you," he continued, "she got pregnant right away. Pretty impressive, huh?" I could not say anything. I just sat there, staring at him. I did not cry. I did not yell. I just felt empty. His parents, overjoyed at the idea of their first grandchild, handed me an envelope stuffed with cash, $10,000, as if that was enough to erase what they had done to me. And just like that, I was out of the house. The next day, as I packed up my things, Heather showed up with Connor and his parents to see me off. She placed a hand on her belly and smiled. "I am going to work hard to have a healthy baby," she said sweetly. Then, in a more condescending tone, she added, "Do not be too sad, okay? Just because you are infertile does not mean you cannot find happiness." She turned without waiting for a response, walking back inside. Connor and his parents followed, shutting the door behind them. I stood on the doorstep, looking at the house I had once called home. And then, with a deep breath, I walked away. 9 years passed. Now I was 37. And today, I had dressed up more than usual, wearing a bright suit with a corsage pinned to my chest. It was my child's elementary school entrance ceremony. Parents were gathered in the gymnasium, chatting as they waited for the students to enter. I held my camera, excited to capture the moment. But then, "Rachel?" The voice behind me was loud and unmistakable. I turned, and there he was. Connor. It had been 9 years since I had seen him, but somehow he had not changed at all. "What are you doing here?" he asked, stepping closer. "Wait, why are you at my kid's school?" I frowned. "Excuse me?" His eyes narrowed. "Hold on. Are you the suspicious person from those emails we get? About weird people lurking near the school?" Next to him stood Heather, dressed in a tight suit and a skirt that was way too short for an event like this. I had not even said a word yet, but Connor smirked, like he had already figured it out. "Wait a second." He suddenly burst out laughing. "Do not tell me you are calling some kid yours?" Heather snickered beside him. "But you are infertile, remember?" Connor sneered. "What, did you just steal a kid or something?" I gritted my teeth. I had no interest in engaging with them. Not here. Not today. So I simply turned my gaze forward and said, "I got married after I cut ties with you. The ceremony is about to start, so why do not you sit down and be quiet?" That shut them up, at least for a second. Then Heather smirked. "Oh, I get it. You married some guy with kids and are playing mom. Wow, Rachel. That is kinda pathetic. I inhaled slowly, trying to keep my patience. I had endured so much from these two already. But if they thought they could humiliate me here, at my child's entrance ceremony, they were about to get a reality check. I felt a presence beside me before I even heard his voice. Well, well, it really is you, Rachel. What are you doing here? I turned my head slightly, already regretting it. Standing right in front of me, grinning like he had just run into an old friend, was none other than my ex-husband, Connor. Wait a second, he said, narrowing his eyes. Why are you at my kid's school? Before I could answer, he smirked. Oh, I get it now. You know, we get those emails all the time about suspicious people hanging around the school. You wouldn't happen to be one of them, would you? I exhaled through my nose, already exhausted by the conversation. Next to Connor, looking exactly as she had 9 years ago, except for a few more wrinkles and an even tackier outfit, was Heather. She had squeezed herself into a bright, miniskirt suit, looking completely out of place for an elementary school event. The last thing I wanted was for anyone to associate me with these people. I am here because it is my child's entrance ceremony, I said simply, keeping my eyes forward. That should have been enough. But of course, it was not. At my words, both Connor and Heather burst into laughter. Did you hear that? Heather cackled, grabbing Connor's arm. She said, my child. Isn't that hilarious? Seriously, Connor scoffed. You? A mom? You do remember that you are infertile, right? I gripped my camera tightly, refusing to give them the reaction they wanted. Their voices were obnoxiously loud, standing out even in the already chatty gymnasium. You know, Rachel, maybe you actually are a suspicious person, Connor taunted. You are out here making up stories about having kids. That is pretty weird, don't you think? I had tolerated enough. I got married after I cut ties with you, I said coolly, not even glancing at them. The ceremony is about to start, so sit down and be quiet. That should have ended it. But of course, it did not. Connor scoffed, flopping into the seat next to me. Heather sat beside him, making a show of rubbing her rounded belly. Oh, did you notice? She said, tilting her chin up. Baby number 5 is on the way. The one entering school today is our third. It is just so easy for me to get pregnant. She gave me a pitiful look. Must be rough for you, huh? Not being able to do the one thing a woman is supposed to? Connor poked my arm, his smirk widening. Hey, are you here alone? Where is your husband? Did he just dump his kid? I clenched my jaw. All I wanted was to watch my child's special moment. Why did I have to be tormented by these two from my past? The ceremony was about to start. If I could just make it through this, I would not have to deal with them any longer. The students began to walk in, and finally, Connor and Heather quieted down. For a moment, I thought they had actually learned some manners. I was wrong. They were just playing games on their phones. I sighed, exasperated. Parents were supposed to set an example for their kids, and yet here they were, clicking away on their screens, completely ignoring the principal's speech. They did not even look up when the PTA representative spoke. Then, hey, look! I barely reacted, but Connor was talking to me again, leaning in like we were old friends catching up. When I ignored him, he jabbed my shoulder. What's with you? Are you actually enjoying your stepkid's entrance ceremony? Who cares about someone else's kid? I felt my patience wearing thin. Connor leaned back with a smirk. Oh, I see. You are scared of your husband, huh? He probably just dumped his kid on you and skipped the ceremony. I bet that kid is going to run straight home and complain about you the second something goes wrong. Connor nodded smugly, as if he had solved some great mystery. I mean, look at me, he continued. I am a good dad. I come to entrance ceremonies and sports days for my kids. That is just normal, right? Meanwhile, your husband does not even show up. Kinda makes him look like trash, don't you think? Heather giggled beside him. Yeah, Connor always shows up for his kids. If you had been able to have kids, maybe you could have been happy with him. That was it. I had tolerated them long enough. I was not going to let them mock my husband. I was not going to let them mock my child. Keeping my gaze straight ahead, I spoke in a firm, clear voice. Would you like to meet my husband? Connor blinked, then let out a mocking laugh. Oh, sure. Where is this loser husband of yours? He made a show of looking around the room. Without moving my eyes from the stage, I answered, He is right in front of us. Connor and Heather finally turned their heads toward the front of the gymnasium. There, standing with absolute confidence, addressing the entire audience, was my husband, Ethan. Connor's jaw clenched. That, I said calmly, is my husband. He is delivering the new student's parents' representative address. Ethan spoke with the same poise and authority that had made him a respected figure in our community. He was not just sitting next to me because he had an important role. He was fully engaged in this special day, just as much as I was. Wait, a representative? Connor muttered. His bravado wavered slightly. What? Is he some kind of attention seeker? Heather crossed her arms. What a joke. But despite their attempts to dismiss him, I could see their discomfort. Ethan had always been the type of person who took responsibility. When our child was in kindergarten, he had volunteered as an officer when nobody else wanted to. Even when the atmosphere was tense, when no one wanted to step up, Ethan had taken charge. He was nothing like Connor, and Connor knew it. I folded my arms and leaned back slightly. You were saying something about my husband being trash? Neither of them had a comeback for that. For the first time since I had run into them, they were at a complete loss for words. And I was just getting started. Ethan stood at the podium, wrapping up his speech with confidence. He gave a slight bow, and the audience responded with a round of polite applause. I glanced at Connor. His face had gone completely pale, his entire demeanor shifting in an instant. His smug arrogance from earlier had vanished, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. No way, that guy! Connor muttered under his breath, shrinking closer to Heather as if hoping she could shield him. He fell completely silent after that. Not another taunt, not another sneer, just quiet. For the rest of the ceremony, he kept his distance, barely looking in my direction. Afterward, the parents began filing out of the gymnasium. I lingered near the entrance, waiting for Ethan, who had been stopped by a particularly chatty neighborhood mom. Knowing how long she could talk, I figured it might be a while. As I stood there, staring up at the sky, I felt eyes on me again. Of course. Connor and Heather, who had been loitering in the background, finally mustered the nerve to approach. What, all alone now? Heather smirked. So was that guy really your husband, or was that just a bluff? Connor let out a scoff. Yeah, that guy is still inside talking to some woman. His real wife, probably. Heather rolled her eyes dramatically. I knew it. There is no way you, of all people, would end up with a guy like that. Must be embarrassing, making up stories like that. She gave me a fake pout. It is okay, though. We understand. You are just jealous of how happy we are. Connor nodded, arms crossed, suddenly acting like he had not just been cowering in fear 5 minutes ago. Anyway, the ceremony was great. Our kid was definitely the cutest one in the class. I barely resisted the urge to roll my eyes. This was the same man who had spent the entire event playing games on his phone and harassing me, and now he wanted to act like a doting father? So which one is your husband's kid? Connor asked, smirking. Introduce us. I turned to face them fully, my voice calm but firm. It is not a stepchild. It is the child I gave birth to. Silence. Heather blinked, then let out a high-pitched laugh. Oh, come on. You? No way. You are infertile, remember? Connor snickered, but his laughter stopped abruptly as a familiar little voice called out, Mom. I turned just in time to see my son, Matthew, running toward me, his face beaming. I felt an immediate wave of protectiveness. The last thing I wanted was for Connor and Heather to interact with him, but since their kids were in the same class, completely avoiding them was impossible. Did I say it loud enough? Matthew asked, looking up at me eagerly. I smiled and ruffled his hair. Yes, you did great. Connor and Heather stood frozen, their smiles wiped clean off their faces. He looks just like you, Connor muttered. Heather's eyes darted back and forth between me and Matthew, as if trying to spot some kind of flaw in our resemblance. We had the same eyes, the same expressions, even the same way of standing. It was undeniable. We were mother and son. Yes, I said simply, meeting their stunned gazes. Because he is my biological child. Connor's mouth opened and closed like a fish. But you were infertile. I let out a slow breath. You know, Connor, after we divorced, I got pregnant almost immediately. And looking back, I am honestly grateful I never had children with you. His face twitched at that. Heather scowled, stepping forward. What are you trying to say? That it was Connor's fault? Just so you know, all 5 of our kids are definitely his. I sighed. There was no point in arguing with him. Believe whatever helps you sleep at night, I said simply, placing a hand on Matthew's shoulder. Now, if you will excuse us. I turned to leave, but before I could take a step, Connor grabbed my arm. Do not you dare talk down to me, he hissed. I barely had time to react before a dark shadow loomed over us. Connor's fingers twitched on my sleeve, and he turned his head slowly. Ethan had appeared behind him, his broad frame blocking out the sun. Without a word, Ethan reached out and lightly removed Connor's hand from my arm. He did not grip it hard, did not twist it, did not even apply pressure. He simply moved it away. And yet Connor was already trembling. Ethan's muscles were visible even through his suit, his presence alone enough to make Connor shrink back. He looked down at my ex-husband, his voice as deep and steady as ever. Is there a problem? Connor stammered. And no, not at all. This has nothing to do with you. He stopped mid-sentence, realization dawning on his face. His voice dropped to a nervous whisper. Wait, you are Ethan Carter? I raised an eyebrow. So Connor had heard of my husband. Ethan did not respond. He just kept staring, waiting. Connor forced a shaky smile, backing up slightly. I have always respected you, sir. I almost laughed. He sounded like a student caught misbehaving by the principal. Ethan remained silent, his gaze unwavering. Connor swallowed hard. He had spent the last hour running his mouth, but now, faced with someone like Ethan, he had nothing to say. From what I had heard, Ethan had always been the kind of man who commanded respect without needing to raise his voice or throw his weight around. People respected him not just for his strength, but for his character. I had also heard rumors, stories about him handling entire groups of troublemakers on his own, of people from rougher towns avoiding him entirely. Ethan himself always dismissed these stories, but the way Connor was reacting, it was clear he believed every single one of them. A bead of sweat rolled down Connor's temple. I crossed my arms. You were saying something about my husband being trash? Connor's expression twisted. He was trying to find a way to backtrack without looking like a coward, but it was far too late for that. Ethan finally spoke again, his voice calm but firm. Let us behave like parents and not embarrass our children. It was not a threat. It was not even a request. It was a statement, a simple, final expectation. Connor nodded so fast it was almost comical. Why, yeah. Of course. His legs were shaking. Ethan narrowed his eyes slightly. It is a promise. Connor swallowed hard, nodded again, and stumbled backward. It was pathetic. All that tough talk, all those years of acting like he was some big shot, and he had crumbled in seconds. Meanwhile, Ethan, once known for his intimidating presence, had not needed to lift a finger. Rachel, Ethan said, turning to me. Shall we go? I nodded. Yes, we have a meeting after this. I took Matthew's hand and walked away, feeling the weight of years of frustration finally lift. Behind me, Connor was still standing there, pale-faced, while Heather looked completely frozen. She had backed the wrong horse, and she was just now realizing it. I had won this time, and I had not even needed to try. Connor had always boasted about how his name alone was enough to make people in town tremble. But where was that bravado now? He was practically shrinking into himself, trying to curry favor with Ethan. Meanwhile, Heather, never one to let an opportunity slip, attempted to cozy up to my husband. She draped herself over his arm, flashing a coy smile, probably expecting him to lap up the attention like the men she was used to. But Ethan? He pulled his arm away without hesitation, his expression one of pure disgust. Do not touch my husband! I snapped before I could stop myself. Heather and Connor both froze, their eyes going wide. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, as if confirming what he had been too scared to acknowledge earlier, Connor turned to me with a bewildered expression. Rachel, you... I met his gaze, my voice steady. I am Ethan's wife. Ethan nodded in agreement, and whatever color was left in Connor's face drained instantly. And no, that cannot be true, he stammered, his shoulders hunching as if trying to make himself smaller. Just moments ago, he had been glaring at me with confidence. Now, he looked like a cornered animal. Ethan tilted his head slightly. You were having quite the conversation with my wife earlier. Please, do not let me interrupt. Connor shook his head rapidly. And no, it is fine, no need. Ethan's gaze didn't waver. I heard a bit of it, though. Infertility, was it? That is an awfully personal topic to discuss so loudly at an event like this. Connor, sweating profusely now, took another step back. I am sorry. Without warning, he collapsed onto his knees, his expensive suit picking up dust from the pavement. I did not know. I had no idea she was your wife. Ethan took a step forward, placing a firm but light hand on Connor's shoulder before he could try banging his head against the concrete. Stand up, he said, his voice calm but commanding. Connor scrambled to his feet, but his legs were shaking so badly he could barely stay upright. So you are Connor Robinson, Ethan mused, looking him over. I have heard about you from Rachel. It seems you did not treat her well in the past. Connor let out a strangled chuckle. WL, that was a long time ago. People change, right? Ethan crouched slightly, bringing himself to Connor's eye level. Exactly, he said with a small, unreadable smile. And as parents, we should set an example for our children. Let us not behave in ways that bring them shame. His voice was deep, steady, unshaken. The words themselves were not threatening, but the weight behind them made Connor's entire body jolt. Connor's breath hitched. His legs trembled even harder, and then, as if the words had physically struck him, he stumbled backward, landing flat on his backside. It was almost pitiful. almost. The same man who had spent years bragging about being feared, the same man who had treated me like I was nothing, was now reduced to a cowering mess just from standing in front of someone stronger than him. Ethan had grown into a mature, respected father. Meanwhile, Connor and Heather had not changed since their high school days. The only difference now was that no one found their act impressive anymore. Ethan exhaled slightly and turned to me. "Shall we go?" I nodded. "Yes, we have the parents' meeting after this." Connor and Heather were still frozen in place, too stunned to speak. As I turned to leave, I glanced at them one last time. "You two should get going, too. The meeting is about to start." Ethan, however, shook his head slightly. "I heard from the PTA president," he said, keeping his voice even. "You two do not have to participate." I blinked in surprise. "Why not?" Ethan gave a small shrug. "Special exemption, apparently." Connor, who had been sitting in stunned silence, suddenly perked up. His entire demeanor changed in an instant. "That is right." He grinned, standing up and dusting himself off. "We are special." His confidence returned unnaturally fast. He looked at me with the same smug expression he had worn earlier. "I am a big deal in this town. You would not know that, Ethan, since you are from the next town over, but here, I am famous. We do not have to do any of that PTA nonsense because the teachers are too scared of me." I stared at him, genuinely at a loss for words. He had gone from terrified to cocky again in under a minute. It was almost impressive how delusional he was. Ethan let out a slow sigh, rubbing his temple. "Do you really believe that?" he asked, his tone shifting slightly. Connor folded his arms, standing taller. "Of course." Ethan shook his head. "The teachers are not scared of you, Connor. They are avoiding you." Connor's smile faltered. "What?" "They do not want you involved because you are a disruption," Ethan explained. "You never contribute, you complain about everything, and you cause problems for other parents. You are not special, Connor. You are excluded." Connor blinked. That is not." He trailed off, looking at Heather for backup. But she was not much better off. Her face was twisted in frustration. Ethan shifted his gaze to her. "And you, Heather, I have heard stories about you as well. Neglecting your responsibilities, prioritizing your own entertainment over your children. Does that sound familiar?" Heather opened her mouth, then snapped it shut, crossing her arms. "That is none of your business." Ethan gave a slow nod. "I see. So it is true." The silence that followed was almost painful to watch. The people around us, the other parents who had been listening in, murmured amongst themselves, some of them nodding in agreement. Connor and Heather had built their entire self-image around being the untouchable big shots of this town. And now, in front of everyone, Ethan had stripped that illusion away in mere minutes. Connor's face burned red with anger and humiliation. His hands balled into fists. "You do not know what happens when you make me mad," he spat. "I have people who will back me up. My guys will come running." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you mean your friends?" Connor puffed up his chest. "That is right." Ethan nodded slowly. "The ones you pay to be around you?" Connor's entire body stiffened. Ethan continued. "From what I have heard, they only show up when you are buying them drinks, covering their expenses, or throwing barbecues with free food." He tilted his head slightly. "Tell me, Connor, when was the last time they came to help you without expecting anything in return?" Connor opened his mouth, then shut it. Ethan waited. Nothing. Connor's confidence cracked. His hands, which had been clenched into fists, loosened. Heather, who had been glaring the whole time, suddenly turned to Connor with a sharp glare. "Connor, just pay them," she snapped. 5,000, 10,000, whatever it takes. Just shut these people up. Connor looked like someone had slapped him. His strength drained out of him in an instant. He knew deep down that his so-called friends were only there because of money. And now even Heather was acknowledging it. A choked sound left his throat. I am important. His voice cracked. Connor's entire body slumped forward, his arms dangling limply at his sides. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the school gate, his head so low he nearly tripped over himself. Heather, completely oblivious to the tension in the air, ran after him. Connor, where are you going? You are not seriously leaving, are you? But he did not answer. As I watched them disappear down the path, I felt nothing but relief. They were finally out of my life for good. Heather fell silent, lowering her gaze. Ethan, however, was not finished. I heard that when you both refused to take part in the PTA, the other parents and teachers were relieved, he said smoothly. Usually, when someone is excused from responsibilities, there are complaints. But in your case, not a single one. That is how much of a nuisance you two are. Several parents who had gathered around nodded in agreement. It was clear that Connor's reputation had already been well established in the community. Connor's face turned beet red. That is nonsense. You think you can get away with saying things like that just because you are from the next town? Do you even know what happens when I get angry? His voice rose to a near shriek as he puffed out his chest. My guys will come running if I call them, he spat, spittle flying from his mouth. Ethan did not even flinch. Oh, your guys? He repeated, tilting his head slightly. That is right, Connor roared. If I make a call, they will be here in minutes. Ethan crossed his arms, unimpressed. You mean the ones you pay to be around you? Connor's expression faltered for a split second. Shut up. That is not, go on, Ethan said evenly. Call them, but do not offer them any money. See who actually shows up. Connor clenched his fists. Of course they will come. Heather, who had been watching quietly, suddenly smacked Connor on the back. Just pay them 5,000 or 10,000 and make them come, she snapped. What are you hesitating for? You have the money, do it. Connor looked like the wind had been knocked out of him. His own wife, his supposed partner, had just exposed the very thing he had been trying to deny. For years, he had convinced himself that his friends respected him, that they had his back. But now, it was clear that everyone, including Heather, knew the truth. He was not powerful. He was not feared. He was just a man who had bought his way into a position of temporary influence. His shoulders slumped as he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. I am amazing, right? His voice cracked at the end, as if he was not even sure anymore. The parents who had been watching shook their heads. No one said a word. Connor suddenly turned and began walking toward the school gate, his head hanging so low it looked like he was trying to disappear. He was not invisible, though. Far from it. It was actually painful to watch. Connor, where are you going? Heather called after him, completely missing the weight of the situation. Are you going to get money from your mother? She ran after him, her heels clicking against the pavement. That was the last time either of them showed up at school. In a small community, rumors spread fast. Before long, people started whispering about something that had clearly been an open secret for years. Not a single one of Connor's 5 kids actually looked like him. Apparently, Heather had been getting a little too close to other men, even at their children's kindergarten and school. But until that day, Connor had been completely oblivious. It was shocking. Even Ethan was taken aback when I told him. How could he be the only one who did not know? He has no real friends, I said simply. No one would tell him the truth. It was as if Connor had built his own little world, a reality where he was the big shot, the feared leader. But in truth, no one actually cared about him enough to be honest with him. He was just a wallet, a source of entertainment, a joke. I felt no sympathy. A few weeks later, Connor showed up at my house. It was unexpected. I had no doubt he had found my address easily. In a small town like this, information traveled fast. I braced myself, assuming he had come to argue, maybe to throw some of his usual insults my way. But when I opened the door, he stood there, strangely calm. Something was off. "I divorced Heather," he said flatly. "She played me. She thought if she married me, she would never have to worry about money again. She had kids with God knows who, used my money to raise them, and laughed behind my back the entire time." Then, to my absolute shock, he laughed, a dry, humorless chuckle. His own parents had taken the children in, refusing to do DNA tests because it would look bad socially. Connor had no idea if any of them were his. "And Mom kicked me out too," he added with a bitter smirk. "Said I wasted too much money." He exhaled sharply, then looked at me with a hopeful gleam in his eyes. "Hey, why do we not try again?" I stared at him. "What?" "We do not need kids this time," he said quickly. I just want to be with you. You always supported me, Rachel. You always." I took a step back. "Absolutely not." Connor's smile twitched. "Come on, we were in love once, right?" I crossed my arms. "So let me get this straight. Your parents abandoned you, your friends have no use for you, and now that you have no one else, you come running to me?" He opened his mouth to argue, but then hesitated. "You are broke," I continued, my voice steady, "and alone, and you think you can just waltz back into my life and I will support you?" His face contorted into something almost unrecognizable, somewhere between anger and desperation. "It is not about money," he protested. I shook my head. "Connor, I cannot even imagine wanting to be with you as a person. That is the problem." The truth hit him harder than any punch ever could. Connor never did leave town. He barely scraped by, bouncing between part-time jobs, enduring the rumors that followed him everywhere. Despite everything, he never had the guts to pack up and start fresh somewhere else. And Heather? She latched onto another man almost immediately, but this time, she was the one who got played. Turns out, she had fallen victim to a scam. The guy she thought she was going to marry? He bled her dry and vanished without a trace. Now, over 40 and drowning in debt, she was still desperately clinging to the illusion that she could live the way she always had. But her looks had faded. Her charm no longer worked like it used to. And men were no longer lining up to give her an easy ride. The rumors about them still reach us from time to time. But soon, we will not have to hear them anymore. Ethan and I have decided to move. It is bittersweet for him. This is the town where he grew up. But even he admitted that he feels limited here. And our son, Matt? "Mom, the new school has 4 classes per grade. Over 100 kids in my year. I could make 100 new friends." His excitement was contagious. Yes, the bigger town will have its own challenges. But I have a feeling the good will outweigh the bad. And as I watch Matt's face light up, I know this is the right choice.